Hello, hello, and welcome back to the After Hours podcast. I'm your host, Jasmine, and unfortunately, this is take two of this because here's the situation. Yesterday night, I sat down and I recorded for about an hour. Probably would have been like 30 to 45 minutes once I edited everything together. And I had clicked a setting on my computer like 7 minutes in, and I lost all audio. So we love that. So I know it's not very after hours of me to be doing this during the daylight, but I don't really have many options because I have to go to the gym later and we got shit to do, shit to do. So here we are trying again. I guess I thought what I said yesterday was so on par, but the universe said, no, you're going to do it again. So we're doing it again. Yesterday, I kind of talked a lot about, well, I guess that's not really important. Anyways, so, I know it's been long time no talk, long time no talk. Um, I am prepping to move currently, in September. So there's been a lot going on for me, and I've been trying to get everything situated. So that is my bad for falling off a little bit on this, but I promise once I get settled in my new place, there'll be more consistency, um, because I do really want to do this. So I actually wrote something down. So we're actually going to be talking about some conversations that have come up in therapy for me that I felt were very useful, tidbits of information to share, so to speak. Originally, I was going to do this about like projection and insecurity, and then some shit came up in therapy on Tuesday night, so 2 days ago, and I was like, I see now. I see. I see. So, kind of starting back at the beginning of where I started yesterday. So Tuesday I was in therapy and I walked in and there was a conversation. There was a conversation taking place that I overheard and accidentally inserted myself into. Whoops. But it got brought back up multiple times in my therapy session, and then my therapist sent me um this message the following day. So yesterday he said, "I really loved what you said to the person in the waiting room yesterday. Be your authentic self. What you're going through is hard and difficult for sure, and I am so impressed that you keep taking the next step and reaching out to the people in your life that are your cheerleaders and supporters for the awesome, authentic being that you are." So that kind of highlights some of the things we're going to be talking about today. This will probably be a shorter one. I know my introductory episode was quite long, so if you sat through that whole thing, much appreciation. I know I rambled on and on quite a bit. This episode's a little bit different. I am not smoking, so I will be probably talking at a extremely fast speed. So feel free to slow me down, to pause me and take a break, to speed me up, whatever your comfort purview is. But anyways, so after this waiting room encounter, I wrote down um this situation from my lens, so to speak. And so I'm gonna start off by reading that. I think I was gonna make it into a poem or some sort of poetic thing, and then I ended up just kind of going off in like a storytelling rant. But so I had originally called it eavesdropping. But here we go. The other day I went to therapy, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't ready for me just yet. So I inhabited the little maroon chair in the corner of his waiting room, wedging myself in between a conversation taking place between two people sitting diagonal from each other. I was the point of the triangle. I try not to listen in, but it's hard when you're almost talking in my ear. And I do love people, so I say. This boy was going on and on very passionately about everyone making mistakes, not being perfect, and trying to just do what's right, not what's wrong. I couldn't help myself, and before I knew it, words convulsed out of my mouth. Just be your authentic self because perfect doesn't exist and it's overrated anyway. Immediately, that inserted me into this conversation, and the boy profusely apologized for being so passionate and emotional, to which I responded, passion is good. It's how you know you're alive. No need to apologize for your feelings ever. 2 seconds later, out they went, and into therapy I went. And I think in every timeline, I've sat myself in that chair and said those words of different fonts to people like this young boy. And I think I was talking to myself too, because now it's eaten at my mind. There is no right and wrong, just feeling. To be authentic is all you can do. Mistakes are inevitable. True wrongs are merely lessons. And I think that's true. I think that's true. I think people struggle with authenticity because, I mean, when I first started doing a lot of healing and self-growth within myself, I, had a difficult time with authenticity, um, and connecting to my authenticity comfortably because I felt like if authenticity is truth, then why is it something you seek, so to speak, you know? But now I understand much more clear than before that authenticity is truth, and it's not necessarily something to be sought out or sought after, but more so, um, like societal patterns, parental patterns, karmic lessons, shit you take into this life with you that you don't even know, kind of programs your way of being. And then you have your ego and your identity, which get in the way of a whole lot. And people attach themselves to this idea of an identity, of their ego, right? What tattoos you have, what piercings you have, what clothes you wear, what style you have, the items you own. And it's like, how would you feel if I told you none of that makes you you? When I first was asked that question, I was like, whoa, like, who are you to tell me it's not me? It is me. And it's like, sure, 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 to an extent, but that's your identity, And to attach yourself to your identity is foolish because we are not our identity. Surely we connect ourselves to certain styles or ideas, um, or ways of being and moving in the world and presenting ourselves, whether it be because of societal patterns, parental patterns, karmic shit, personal experience, or what you align with in your soul as a person. But it does not make you you at the end of the day. It does not make you you. And I think a lot of people struggle with that. And I feel like this idea, that not only that you have to be perfect, but the people around you have to be perfect is such an interesting construct to me. Because perfect is so overrated. And I feel like, a really difficult thing is when it's your parents, and I believe that that's what that young boy was speaking about in the waiting room was his parent. And it's difficult when it's somebody who's in an authorial position in your life because you kind of view that person in a like perfect manner and kind of assume that they know what they're doing. And it's like none of us really know what we're doing, whether, it's your parent or not. We're all trying to figure it out at the end of the day, every single day, and everybody makes mistakes. But to realize that as a child can be very world shattering. And it's difficult because you do think, well, why can't you act in the right? Why can't you not act in the wrong? And it's like, well, nobody's a perfect person. And the goal is not to be perfect. And the goal is to make mistakes. The difference is how you choose to learn from those mistakes. Because you can either make a change or you can stay the same and continue to make the same mistakes because it's more comfortable because you prefer habit, which is understandable. But at a certain point, you have to come to a realization within yourself that you don't want that for yourself, that you want to make a change for yourself. And that starts within yourself. There's no making a change for somebody else. There's no, other people can inspire you to want to make changes for yourself, to be your best self 100%. I do agree with that. But at the end of the day, change is scary. Change is scary, and I understand that. But I also believe that staying the same is even scarier. So it's almost like you have to choose, you know, it's almost like you have to choose what's scarier, staying the same or changing. Can you be proud? Can you stand in empowerment? Can you own yourself if you stay the same? Are there pieces of your comfortability that are serving you that you can take with you as you transform yourself and your mentality, your mindset, how you move, how you act towards other people, etc. Right? Or even stripping away the fear aspect, you know, um, because it's not about fear. It's not about focusing on which one is scarier. It's like which one's going to serve you in the long run. Which one is going to make it so you can look yourself in the mirror and be proud of what you see back. And you will always make mistakes, like that's what it means to be human. But like I said, it's how you choose to respond to those mistakes, how you choose to apply the lessons from those mistakes that really define, um, like where you go next. You know what I mean? Because you can choose to not apply something and then you're almost stuck in this cyclical loop because lessons will continue to be brought to you in different ways, regurgitated in different experiences in different situations and different feelings until you choose to learn that lesson, until you choose to feel that. And not always is it some grandiose thing, this big lesson, this big like motto you want to write down or something like that. Not always is it that. Sometimes it's something you feel. Sometimes it's the fact that you need to connect to your feeling. And that's something that I think a lot of people have difficulties with. But at the end of the day, if you don't feel what you're feeling in a given moment in response to a situation, then that's going to get stored in your body and it is going to come back up later until you choose to feel that. And that's a really difficult thing. And being able to strip yourself from perfectionism, being able to make the hard changes, being able to recognize your wrongs, being able to take accountability, to have humility, that is uncomfortable 100%. But what uncomfortability would you prefer? The uncomfortability within yourself or the uncomfortability that comes with change? And that's a question you have to ask yourself and you have to sit with at the end of the day. And I feel like, um, I feel like one of the most uncomfortable things about change in regards to the ego and your identity and like what feels attacked when these kind of changes are happening or coming up has a lot to do or um kind of is reflected in how you project your shit at the end of the day. You know what I mean? Like for me personally, I feel like everything really is a mirror. And when you are choosing to work on the difficult parts of yourself, you're choosing to look in the mirror, you're choosing to look in the mirror, you're choosing to acknowledge the ugly parts, so to speak, and still find love and acceptance for that and find a way to transcend that into something beautiful, into something that will serve you, into something that will serve the people around you, into something that won't be hurtful towards you or towards other people or towards your environment. And that can be a really difficult thing. Psychiatrist slash psychologist Carl Jung wrote a lot about the shadow self, and that kind of goes into like the four main archetypes, the four main pillars within archetypes, if you know anything about that, which I just had a conversation with somebody about the other day as well. So that's a whole different thing in itself. But one of the main pillars, like you have yourself and then you have your shadow. And I feel like a lot of people don't fully understand what it means to do shadow work or what it means to see your shadow self and to see those shadow parts. But it's very uncomfortable and your ego gets called out and it doesn't feel great. And it's easier to just stay in the comfortable and to stay in the habit. Humans are creatures of habit at the end of the day. And so that's understandable. But does that make it acceptable? Not necessarily. At the end of the day, how you live is your choice, but can you be proud of that? I guess is what it comes down to. Can you stand in your autonomy with that? Can you stand in your sovereignty with that? Can you feel empowered in the way that you're acting and moving? And if not, then yeah, address the change. And yes, it is difficult, but being able to recognize the people who will share that experience with you, be there for you, and not just support you, but clock you as well. For example, in therapy, I want to say almost a year ago, I was bringing up a situation that really bothered me between two uh, people in my family, so kind of, sort of. And these two people are very manipulative, they're control freaks, and they go about and they move in a way that manipulates situations and conversations in a hurtful manner towards other people to control the situation or conversation to how they want it to be. And I think we've all kind of fallen subject to that, but I definitely see it amplified in them. And it's really difficult because I think my whole life I haven't, it's not necessarily that I've been on a kick of like, oh, I can change this person, I can fix this person, but more so like, how do I grab you and be like, hey, like, wake up, or like, hey, like, don't you see how you're acting? How are you okay with that? How is that right in your mind, right? Going back to that kind of term of phrasing. And it's like you can't do that. And especially, people who are, I believe, over 25, once your prefrontal cortex develops, it becomes so much more difficult to work on certain aspects within your shadow self because you've created all these habits and all these agreements that you've lived with for so long that it becomes even more uncomfortable, even more difficult to kind of come out of that in a sense. So regardless, but yeah, so besides the point, I was bringing up all this and I was kind of venting and I was like, they're so manipulative, there's this, nah, nah, nah. And I'm bringing up all these facets within these two people that I really don't agree with, that I really don't enjoy, that I think needs to be changed. And I'm kind of like, how is somebody allowed to do that and not have any sort of repercussions and whatever. And my therapist stopped me and he asked me what in them that upsets me this much is a reflection of something within me. So I'll let you sit with that. What in them that upsets you this much is a reflection of something within yourself? And that's a difficult question. Because at first I felt really attacked. I'm like, you're trying to, like, I'm not manipulative. I'm not a control freak. I'm not this. And it's like, hold on now. Because if somebody else is upsetting you that much, to where you're that emotionally charged, chances are there's some sort of mirror going on. There's something that you need to look at within yourself. And that's been a very difficult concept for me because I think my whole life I've been used to being the one that's holding up the mirror, or at least trying to hold up the mirror, whether it be through my words, my behavior, my energy, whatever that is. And oftentimes, people see this, you know, reflection that they don't necessarily like of themselves. And they do not understand how to work with that. And so, in turn, that gets projected onto who they view me as a person, which kind of shatters the mirror and only cuts myself and hurts myself. And yet, I continue to, like, reassemble it and be like, no, try again, try again. And I think for a while, I kind of neglected some of the mirrors that were around me. And granted, like that doesn't go for everything. If something really upsets you and somebody else doesn't necessarily mean like, oh, like you're that same way too. No, no, no. But there's something here to work with and to grow from. If it's getting you that emotionally charged at the end of the day. And I did have to realize, like, oh, okay, like I definitely have manipulated situations to control the outcome or the conversation in the way that I wanted it to go, whatever the case was. And that was a hard pill to swallow. My ego was very offended by that. But at the same time, this is the work that I'm asking to do. So how can I be upset by something that is brought to me that I'm asking to do, because I could stay in this uncomfortability and I could stay being emotionally charged about this person. I could stay feeling upset about this situation and I could stay projecting my feelings about that onto whatever the case is, whatever the situation is. Or I could choose to look in that mirror and be like, okay, hold on. I don't like this and I want to address this and I want to make a change and I want to move forward. Point blank, period. And that's difficult. And then it's like, well, where do you start? And it's like, going back to the idea of projection, and I'm sorry, I know I kind of bounce around a lot. I think that's part of the reason why I decided a podcast would be good. Hopefully you can keep up. I apologize. I have ADHD, and like I said, I am not smoking weed at the moment. So my brain is like ding 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 all over the place. But so this idea of projection, right? Like there are certain things I feel like as humans we project onto other people based off of what they say to us personally that has to do with like I talked about before, societal patterns ingrained in you, parental patterns ingrained in you, karmic shit ingrained in you that you have no necessarily no control over. Um, Personal experience, feelings not dealt with, and that can track back to childhood even. And so I feel like it's easy to think, well, you need to change. Well, you need to change how you said this to me because it made me feel this. And it's like, first and foremost, nobody can make you feel anything. Your feelings are your own. And until you can take accountability for your own feelings, then work within how you project your shit probably will be fairly stagnant. And I feel like that's something that's really confused about accountability as well, is that a lot of people think, well, accountability is being able to recognize your wrongs in terms of somebody else, in a situation with somebody else, being able to say, yeah, that was wrong with me. Yeah, I messed up here. And it's like, sure, to an extent, but I think accountability stems from within and stems within the self. Can you take accountability for your shit to your face? Can you sit in front of the mirror and be like, yeah, I did this fucked up thing. Yeah, I moved in this way that I actually don't like and I don't want to own for myself. It's like, can you take that accountability so that you can make a change so that it doesn't feel uncomfortable anymore? So you don't feel so personally attacked by whatever it is coming up that's reminding you of that situation right now. And I also feel like, you know, it kind of tracks within boundary work as well. I feel like a lot of people don't necessarily know how to move around boundaries properly. A lot of people think boundaries are like this forceful thing that's like, well, you need to not do this, so I feel this, or you need to not say this like this or do this or else da 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 or I won't, but da da da. And it's like at the end of the day, that's not a boundary, that's an ultimatum. And then people get frustrated and people get let down when that ultimatum isn't upheld in the way that they want it to be upheld. And it's like, well, because you're not setting a boundary at all. You're not communicating what you need properly at all. You're making a demand of somebody else. And at the end of the day, nobody's feelings are your responsibility. And that's really difficult to understand. How somebody perceives something you say is not your responsibility. But vice versa too. How you perceive something that somebody else says is not their responsibility. You can be aware of how you move in a conversation. If you have an intention of something landing a specific way with somebody, you can be aware of how you choose to go about that so that hopefully it'll land in the way that you're hoping it lands. But then this is where the issue of communication lies, is as stupid as it sounds, and this is kind of all tracks from a book that I read and listened to called Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. You should check it out. I would suggest listening to it. It's on Audible just because it's narrated by the author. So the way in which he speaks and his cadence and rhythm is very conversational. I feel it's easier to apply the things he's talking about, especially in terms of communication, when you kind of hear it from him. And if you're the kind of person where you need to like read and listen, do both totally. But either way, you know, proper communication when it comes to trying to make sure you understand someone, try like at the end of the day, you don't live in somebody else's brain. You might think you understand something, but maybe you didn't. Then there's this miscommunication happening that's silent. You don't even know, or it could be energetical. So one thing I learned was how to be able to reiterate what somebody just said, how you heard it. And a lot of people can't do that because it's like, oh, that's so stupid. Like, I heard you, I understand you. And it's like, but did you? Like if I say, I'm feeling hurt with the way that you worded this sentence, this is how it landed with me, right? And that person's response can be, okay, I hear you that you're saying you feel hurt by the way that I worded this situation and it landed with you like XYZ, right? And let's just say you misinterpreted something. Let's just say, you took something that someone said as anger, and when you reiterate that back to them, that person is like, wait, no, that's not what I said. But how you perceive that is valid, but it's not what I said, so there's some disconnect happening here. So, what can I do to create a better environment for communication where we are both understanding each other? Because language is the biggest tool of unification and also can be the biggest tool of separation. So, how you choose to move around that is crucial. And a lot of people, like I said, your egos get involved, and it's really easy to be like, whatever. And it's like, but do you want to do this work or not? Do you want to be the best version of yourself you can be or not? Do you want to step into your authenticity? Do you want to move in a way that serves you fully or not? And oftentimes that requires making uncomfortable or difficult decisions, like breaking the agreements that you make with yourself in your mind, which kind of tracks back to a book that I stand by. It's called The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. You should check it out. All of his books are tremendous. The Fifth Agreement, The Mastery of Love, all of his son's books are tremendous. The actor, I believe they wrote The Fifth Agreement together. Um, Beautiful, amazing. There's no real way to sum up anything said in those books other than just reading them for the language in which they're written in. So I would definitely recommend checking those books out. I would start with either Mastery of Love or The Four Agreements, but whichever book finds you was in your alignment to read. But circling back to boundaries, right? Instead of making a demand, there's a way to move. Boundaries are a request. I would like to request that this is worded differently or this is done differently. I felt da 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 when this happened, right? Not this made me feel. Because why are you giving all of your power and putting it in something else or someone else's hands? Hello? Those are your feelings. Hold that. Feel that. Stand in that. Advocate for yourself in a non demanding, non volatile manner, and you'll probably get a better response. And chances are people won't understand that either. But then you also have to understand it is not your responsibility to get somebody to see that. There is only so much of a mirror you can hold up, and there's also only so much you can tolerate within your own energy space. Sorry, plugging my computer in right now. But so, being clear on that, and then if that request is not respected or upheld, that's when you can ask yourself, how am I going to enforce this? And again, it's not in a volatile or demanding sense. It's not That's not what boundaries are. Then you just take it back to being an ultimatum, you take it back to being a demand, maybe less spoken. You know what I mean? And so when it comes to projection, there's a lot of ways things can get projected onto somebody else without you even realizing. And one of those ways is the miscommunication within boundaries. Somebody words something a certain way that lands with you a certain way, and you go to bring that up like, hey, like, this landed with me in a way I don't appreciate, or I don't think you meant for it to land, and I want to communicate that. So I don't sit and stew on it, so I can advocate for myself and my feelings properly. And then you might notice, well, you know, I probably only took this way because of ABC, XYZ, whatever the case is. And then you can kind of sit with yourself and be like, you know what? That's not your responsibility. However, this conversation was still useful to have to understand me and how I work as a person, but it's not your responsibility to take accountability for my feelings or how I perceive the situation. But that's a really crucial moment. And it's really difficult because it's so much easier to be like, no, you made me feel this. No, this word made me feel this. No, I felt this when you said da da da. So you have to change this behavior. And it's like, not necessarily. Somebody can change the way they're moving within a conversation. Somebody can change the way that they're moving in a given conversation, sure, but you are the only one that can change how you choose to perceive that at the end of the day. And like I said, sometimes it's easier to be in what's comfortable, to perceive it in a way you've always perceived it, to place yourself in a victimizing stance. Sure, it can be easier, but how does that serve you? How does that serve the other person? How does that serve your environment? How does that serve how you want to move forward within yourself, within your life, within any situation that arises? And you have to ask yourself that question. And asking yourself that question is the first step, and even that can be one of the most difficult things to do because, again, then your ego gets involved, your ego feels attacked. But I think I said this in the last episode, ego simply is edging God out. EGO, edging God out. And whatever it is that you believe God is at the end of the day, an all-knowing, a divine consciousness, something that lives within all of us, similarly to the story of Maya and Brahma that I told in the last episode. This all-knowing, this God is within all of us, and that's a part of our authenticity. And every time that you let your ego, your identity rule you, control you, rule how you move in a given situation, take accountability for your feelings, 100%, you're edging God out. Your ego edges God out. However you want to take that, however you want to interpret that is up to you. However that lands with you is up to you. Because again, like I said, not my responsibility. Not my responsibility. But you don't want that belief system to create arrogance. And for you to move in accordance with this arrogance in a way that then hurts other people unknowingly, at the end of the day. But you also don't necessarily need to move in a way that defers your behavior, your feelings, or your words, or your choices for other people's feelings. This is your life. This is your autonomy. Take accountability for that. Take accountability for that. Accountability is your power. Point blank, period. Accountability within yourself, accountability in a given situation with other people, all of that is your power. Being able to harness that in a proper way that serves you and serves people around you and serves your environment, that's what's important. And that's the kind of environment you want to curate, so to speak, if you want to word it like that. But kind of, taking it back to this idea of being authentic, this idea of leaning on the people who support you kind of brings me to my next little story. Also something that was spoken about in therapy 2 days ago. Um, Something my therapist said to me, the analogy that he said was, the I, the self, is like this island. And as you're doing this work, as you're doing this personal work, as you're stripping away your ego, as you're getting closer within your authenticity, this island's kind of sinking. And then you're left in the ocean. And oftentimes it's easy to be like, wait, no, I want to go back to my island. I want to go back to my island. It was comfortable. I had everything I needed. And it's like, okay, cool. But when you were on your island, you also didn't want to be on your island. You wanted to change on your island. So what do you want? Because the ocean's not always comfortable. And you can either learn to tread and you can learn to swim, or you can continue to go back to your island and continue to wish that you were in the ocean. And then you might say, oh, can you come join me in this part of the ocean? Because at the end of the day, we're humans. We're humans. Companionship and connection and unification is just something that runs within us, whether we want to acknowledge that or not. And so we might reach out to somebody. Can you sit in this experience with me? Can you help me learn how to tread water? Can you just be with me while I learn how to tread water? And some people will be like, listen, I'm on my island. Leave me alone. I want to stay on my island. And it's like, yeah, I understand that. And then you also have to understand you cannot coerce somebody to come off their island. They'll come off their island in due time when they're ready. And you have to ask yourself, do you want to continue to align yourself with that? In a non-judgmental sense, because you were just on your island too, and you were complaining you want to go back to your island too. Something I struggle with is when I'm asking for somebody to sit in a situation like that with me, to experience something with me, to see me and to see my feelings and to have a shared experience with me, just so that it doesn't feel so consuming within myself. To me, oftentimes that feels selfish. Who am I? If this is so intense for me and I'm trying to learn how to tread and it's uncomfortable and the water's cold and I just want to go back to my island, who am I to ask you, can you come sit in this with me? For what? For what? Why am I asking you to come sit in my shit with me? And it's like sometimes that's what we need. Sometimes that's what we need. And being somebody who grew up with in a really traumatic household, I didn't have proper examples of how to ask for that kind of help. And it kind of goes in tandem with asking for help. At the end of the day, wise people ask questions. Wise people ask for help. Asking for help does not mean that you are. I actually have something in my notes about this. Let me pull that up. I guess I didn't write this down, but that's shitty. That's okay. At the end of the day, asking for help does not mean that you're weak. It's acknowledging that some things just aren't meant to be experienced alone. And that's okay. And it's also okay to recognize that some people will not be able to experience that with you. And it does not mean anything negative against that person or their character, who they are, or any of that. At the end of the day, asking for help is something that you can do to continue to build trust within yourself, to continue to build trust within your community, to continue to allow somebody to see you for the pieces of you that have nothing to do with your identity, that have nothing to do with your ego. Allowing somebody to see you can be a very vulnerable situation. And I feel a lot of people, especially in this generation, including me, I was raised to believe that vulnerability is weakness. And it's like vulnerability is one of your greatest strengths, being able to be vulnerable. And that's something that's taken me a long time to realize. But anyway, so I grew up in a household with a lot of trauma, and something that was difficult for me is like I just wanted to be seen. I heard the phrase a lot growing up that like, well, you have a good life. You have a lot of privilege. Like you have nothing to complain about. And it's like, listen, there are plenty of things in my life I can be grateful for. There are plenty of things in my life that I can look back on and have gratitude towards, express gratitude towards. But at the end of the day, acknowledging my feelings and its validity is important, and being able to have somebody to see me in that was important, especially as a child who didn't understand what was going on and was trying to understand the rights and the wrongs of the situation. And as a child is kind of when you're most vulnerable, because you're the most dependent and you're still soaking up information like a sponge, and you are learning from the people in your lives, whether they are making mistakes or not. You are learning that and you are viewing that in a lens of this is right. This is acting in accordance with me, or whatever the situation is. And that can be really difficult. So something for me I struggled with was being seen and being able to see myself. And it's not necessarily that I needed somebody else to see me to see myself, but due to what I was experiencing at the time, it was really difficult to see myself and see my feelings and its validity, even though I was like, I know what I'm feeling is right. I know what I'm feeling is valid. I know I'm not crazy. And I really needed that. And I had one experience where I kind of experienced that for the first time. And I was crying to, I have like two friends since childhood that I will just always have undying amounts of love for. And one of them, she lived like right up the street from me. So we were always at each other's houses. Like we were just each other's safe havens for everything we were going through. And she had come over to my house and I was crying my eyes out. And I was definitely very consumed in my own shit. And that's something I used to judge myself a lot for, or just judge how I responded to my own feelings a lot for. Little side tangent. Um, I was recently in the beginning of this year, January, February, whenever that came out, maybe March it was, maybe April, May-ish, I believe. I think towards the end of April. Yeah. Kayla Malik came out with a YouTube video, and she's an influencer that I've always really respected and kind of always followed because I always really resonated with her, and I always kind of felt like I saw a lot of things within me in her as well. So she came out with this video about 2 to 3 hours long called He Doesn't Love You, Part 1 and Part 2, about her experience in a domestic violent domestic relationship where there was abuse going on. And I remember I watched the whole thing in entirety, and I definitely questioned my own experiences. And I was like, well, I can't say that I was in an abusive relationship because I didn't have this happen to me, because I didn't have this happen to me. First and foremost, you can't compare your experiences, but sometimes it's inevitable. It's within the human condition. So being able to recognize, okay, hold on, I'm comparing. There was a part of me that I was like, I actually don't remember the exact thought process and why I went about doing this, but I ended up going back in my Google Photos all the way back down to when I was in an abusive relationship and I had all these screenshots of certain messages that I don't even think I was conscious of taking a screenshot of at the time. And I started reading through them, and I've read through them before, but the problem is I've read my responses and I've been very judgmental towards myself of like, why would you speak that way? Like, why are you moving? Like, ew, like that's so pick me. Ew, like, why are you being so sulky about it? And it's like, I was a child. I was a child. But I always kind of had this like level of judgment within myself and how I responded to my own emotions. And I'm still working through that to an extent for sure. Like I said, nobody's perfect. We're all works in progress. It's about how you can connect to your authenticity. And sometimes the experiences that happen in your life do shape how you move about that, how you learn those lessons, how you're able to step into that. So this one day I was going back and I got to one message that was very violent and threatening, and I was like, and I looked at my response, and for the first time ever I read my response and was like, wow, that's sad. It was almost as if I was reading the response of somebody else. Not that I was disconnected with myself, because I was not at all in that. um but more so just the fact that it was almost like I was reading it and I was kind of viewing myself outside of my body, outside of myself, and being like, wow, like that is a traumatized and scared little girl who just wanted to be loved. And this was her first real relationship, and she thought that she had that, and she did not. And so no wonder I responded how I did. And then you go back and you think about, all the things I had went through. No wonder I responded how I did. And for the first time ever, I had this level of empathy within myself and these younger versions of me that I wasn't able to have before. And so I was able to see that. And I think for the next like 3 to 4 weeks after that, I was just like crying and angry, constant panic attacks. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't responding, reacting, or projecting what was happening to me or what had happened to me. For the first time in my life, I was feeling everything, and it was overwhelming. It was a lot, but for the first time, I was able to really see myself in a lens that I hadn't before. But my point is, shifting that judgment was pivotal for me. But I think if I was any other version of myself telling this story right now, I would maybe skip over the fact that I asked my friend to come over and to sit with me in this shit, to, experience these tough emotions with me. I think this was right after I was sexually assaulted. So those are some really heavy things to deal with, especially as a 17-year-old girl. And at the time, I was a virgin. So it was all of these new feelings. And I felt mentally violated. I felt physically violated in every single way, spiritually violated in multiple different ways. And I did not understand that. And I did not understand how to see myself in that. And I was so consumed in my emotions that being able to share that with somebody was important for me so that I didn't continue to drown in what I was feeling. But I think if I was telling this story, like I said, at any other point in my life, I maybe would have skipped over the fact that, like, yeah, I was super consumed in my own shit that I didn't even, I'm sitting here crying and venting about how much pain I was in, and I honestly didn't even recognize somebody else in the room with me. But at the end of the day, that's the position that I was in. And it's part of the reason why I needed to be seen the way that I needed to be seen. And as I was crying and venting, whatever, I look up and this friend is crying. And I remember being so confused by that. And I looked at her and I was like, why are you crying? And she was like, because it hurts me how much you're hurting right now. And that was a shock to me. You know, she was simply just experiencing what I was experiencing and also experiencing her own emotions as my friend, as somebody who cares so deeply about me, who has seen me in so many different parts of my life, who was hurting for my hurt. And I really needed that in that moment. And that was one of the first times I felt seen. And from that moment, I think it helped me better see myself. And then fast forward to when I had this experience where I watched this YouTube video and I had these like 3 to 4 weeks where I was just like in shambles. And I think for the first time in my life, like I wanted to tell my story kind of in chronological order, because I wanted to be able to own it and be like, this is my story. Yeah, this is something you did to me, but this is my story. This is my life, and it's made me everything that I am today. And I needed to be able to own that in a verbal sense and also not be consumed in all the things that I was feeling for the first time ever. And so I reached out to one of my friends that I grew up with, and she's been with me in my life and close to me when a lot of these traumas and stuff were happening. So it's not like she didn't know, but I definitely didn't share with her like everything that happened and whatever. So I had reached out to her and I was like, listen, like I know that this is a lot to ask, but like I really need to be able to sit down and just tell my story to somebody who will hold that space for me. And I feel like you can do that and you can hold that space for me in a safe manner. And it was hard to not feel selfish in that. You know what? I'm going to come over and I'm going to sit and talk about the years of abuse I experienced from age 0 to now. I'm 22. Like, you know, I think a lot of people might take that as like a pity party or however you want to word that. And it's like in that moment, that's what I needed. And I'm forever grateful that that friend was able to see that, recognize that, and hold that space for me. And I didn't get through everything, obviously, but so I like went over to her house late at night and I kind of started at like age 0 and went up to, I believe, like age 9 or 10 and kind of like paused there. And, we were crying on and off and like conversating. I was definitely not closed off in my emotions. I was definitely like engaged in the fact that I was speaking to her at this point in my life. Like I said, this was back in April, so not too long ago. And but before I left, she kind of like broke down and we hugged and we were both crying and she said to me, I had no idea. She's like, I knew you went through shit. I knew you had these traumas. I knew you went through this or that, but I had no idea. I had no idea. I had no idea it was this bad. I had no idea that this happened. I had no idea the feelings. And to be able to have that experience with her, it was simply unification. We were both experiencing the same feelings, even though none of these feelings were hers necessarily. And that was such an important lesson for me to understand as well and create this different layer of understanding myself and seeing myself and recognizing myself and being able to, not have pity on myself, but just be like, wow, that was sad. That is sad. That should have never happened. That should have never happened to me or anyone. And I understand why I acted the way that I acted at different points in my life. And I needed that level of understanding within myself. And I also needed for somebody else to see that in me too and experience that with me too. So I think it's really important to be able to acknowledge the people that are in your life that can stand in that with you, that can experience that with you without it drowning either one of you, and using that as a tool to move in your authenticity, so to speak, to move forward in your own process of self-growth, to becoming the best version of yourself that you can, to becoming the version of yourself that you feel most aligned to, that you feel proud of. And like I said, that's a really difficult thing. And oftentimes, when you're going through that, it's really easy to project. Somebody says something to you, especially when you're in the midst of healing and growth when it comes to lots of trauma and stuff. It's really easy to be like, well, how dare you say that to me? How dare you act that way to me? And, be very sensitive and take things very personally. And it's like, at the end of the day, the first agreement in the Four Agreements, the book, is to not assume anything and to not take things personally. Don't make assumptions and don't take things personally. Right? And that's a difficult concept to understand. It's easy when you say it, but then actually applying that in the difficult situations that it needs to be applied in is hard and it's uncomfortable. And that's where the most work happens. So when somebody says something you take a certain way, sure, you might want to be like, hey, I don't appreciate that. And there are ways to communicate that 100%. But then you also have to ask yourself, what mirror is coming up right now? Why did I not like what you said? Why did I not like what just happened? Why did I not like this? And that's where some of the self-accountability lies. And then being able to acknowledge that's that person too. Hey, I didn't really appreciate the way that you went about this, the way you worded this, but I also recognize that it's probably coming up for me because of XYZ. And, putting that in a sense of like, you can connect with me, you can further understand me while I work through this or not. And that's kind of in the same sense asking for somebody to stand with you in this part of the ocean, to tread water with you in this part of the ocean that's really cold, that's shark infested, that's really scary, that makes you want to retreat back to your island, you know? So anyways, I'm kind of getting off track here because I'm talking about a bunch of different topics in one, so that's my bad. I do feel like they kind of all interconnect in their own ways. I mean, everything is connected, right? And like I said in the last episode, all things work together for good. So however it is that I go about getting this message across, however it lands with you, I think is how it was supposed to. And maybe that's the reason why none of this recorded yesterday. And that's just how it is sometimes. Everything does happen for a reason. And that's all that that's all you can do. You can't control certain situations. I really do hope that some of the things that I said could land with you in a way that, you needed. Um, and if this found you, that this can be a tool to serve you further. I think if I were to find a video like this years ago, it definitely would have opened my eyes in a lot of different ways and definitely called me out in a lot of different ways. There might be a big old mirror in this podcast episode, in this video, whichever format you're watching or listening to, that you're like, oh, damn, it's like she's calling me out right now. And it's like, no, actually, I'm not. I'm talking about myself. But now you can see that parallel that I'm describing with the mirrors that live all around us, and kind of tying back when I brought up Carl Jung when he did all his studies in the shadow self and shadow work. It's about recognizing what comes up in that reflection of the mirrors all around you, because everything is a mirror, because there's opportunities for growth everywhere. And that's really important to acknowledge. And it's uncomfortable. And today I actually wrote something about other people being uncomfortable as you step into this change, not just yourself. And kind of the comfort that comes in the uncomfortability once you start doing a lot of this work, and also recognizing like, oh, like I prefer the uncomfortability. I'd prefer this than to know that I'm staying the same in these ways that aren't serving me, that maybe I don't even realize because my ego shuns my consciousness from viewing that, from realizing that, from having that awareness to it. So I wrote two things. Here's the first one, and this will be like my concluding factor for this episode. Short and sweet. This is untitled. Am I making you uncomfortable yet? When I dismember myself limb by limb, when I peel my face to rid my skin, when I eat my eyes to consume the wisdom they've witnessed. Buried in corneas deep within, ripping myself apart so that I'm no longer something I am not, because I'd rather be ugly and unbearable than to be a fraud. Do I make you uncomfortable? The way I smear my blood across my canvas and glue my eyelashes to my paintbrush so I can see clearly when it's evident you cannot. I hope I make you uncomfortable. I can't snap with this hand, but and then the second one is called Elements on My Skin. Mud in my mouth, honey on my hands, my name unspelled, and they call it a breakdown, while I sat and burned mold from inside my bones. I bled eucalyptus from my eyes, shed skin like cracked porcelain melting a disguise, and everyone stared like I'd grown wrong. But I was just becoming what I begged the stars to make me. Transformation doesn't wear white. It screams and it shivers, it rips seams and steals livers, and no one claps when the cocoon splits ugly. Call it a fall, but it felt like flying with bones still breaking midair. It's not so clean, not so pretty, but mine, and still more than holy. I saw God in the flicker of a dying streetlight, heard her voice in my own ragged breathing at 3 a.m. She didn't ask me to kneel, for survival was the prayer. They want the ashes, but not the fire. Want the light, but not the burn. But I am reborn in ways they don't write rhymes for. I howl and I pulse and I exist in truth too wild for palpable praise, I guess, and that's fine. My ribs open wide, and I'm not perfect, will never be, and this isn't painless, you see, but mine, and still so very sacred. And if my change makes you uncomfortable, then turn your face, but don't call it wrong just because it scorched your comfort. So yeah, I think that's a good place to kind of wrap this up for now. Um, I would say give me a couple weeks to get situated within my move and everything that I have going on with that, and then I will definitely be back to preaching what I'm preaching and talking about what I'm talking about. In a way, it kind of helps me peel these layers within myself to have that verbal connection even when I'm just talking to myself. Sometimes I need to say it to myself, and that kind of ties me back to what I brought up in the beginning of this, that conversation that I butted into in the waiting room of therapy. I think in every timeline, right? Like think about like the Spider-Verse and shit. Like in every timeline where I've been like almost like a canon event. I've come to this waiting room and I've sat in that same seat and this similar kind of conversation was taking place. And whether it was the same boy or not, I feel like I said that same thing in each timeline and in the same hand, I was speaking to myself too. And I think that's one of the most important parts about preaching wisdom and preaching, lessons you've learned and experiences you've gone through. Speaking of that, I have thought about creating a podcast slash YouTube video episode where I talk about my story for how useful it would be for me to be able to acknowledge that publicly, to acknowledge that vulnerability publicly, but also what it could do for somebody else. Like I mean, even Kayla Malik's video, like there's a certain level of healing that brought on within me that I didn't even think watching that video would have done for me. But I sat and I watched all 6 hours of footage, or however long it was, for whatever reason, whether it be curiosity or something in my energy knew that I needed to watch that, whatever. And so I think something important for me when it comes to sharing things, whether it be my writing, my music, my podcasts, whatever it may be, is that it's able to connect with somebody else in a way that they need. Maybe I don't, intend for it to land a certain way, but that's how it landed for you because that's what you needed. And I think that's important for me. And if sharing my story can help other people acknowledge what they've been through or, validate themselves or see themselves or even just realize a given situation they're in that's not okay because sometimes you do grow up in these environments that, kind of lead to this belief system that certain behaviors and certain way of moving is okay, then, that's something I think I might do. So, if and when that time is right for me to do that, then I might do that. But going forward, will be doing some solo episodes. I will still be incorporating some of my friends, different guests to kind of just like question and talk about with these big existential topics. I have a bunch written down in a list in my phone. So I'm definitely eager to go about that. But like I said, that'll come up for me as it's meant to come up for me. In whichever ways. I also kind of want to do some debates on here about these kinds of, I guess you could say, existential topics, so to speak, if that's, how you want to word it. If there's something specific that you want to hear me talk about, whether it be by myself or debate with somebody else or kind of just discuss in a conversational manner, drop it below. Let me know. Let me know. Um, and for my viewers on YouTube, you should totally like this and you should totally subscribe for more. Thanks. No, but seriously, I appreciate you. I appreciate your support. Um, I hope you were able to take what you needed to take from this and don't stew on it. Maybe you need to write something down. Maybe you need to process it. Maybe you need to sit and meditate on some of these things brought up. Maybe you need to put out the intention to be more aware of the mirrors around you for you. Whatever this episode brought up for you, um, I hope that you can work with in a way that serves you. I think that's one of my biggest intentions with this, besides the work that I'm doing for myself. So all light and all love always, and thank you always, and I will see you on the next episode.